You've changed. You've probably heard that sentence before. Maybe it was your childhood best friend, voiced tight with something between hurt and accusation. Maybe it was your partner during one of those conversations where the silence says more than the words. Maybe it was a family member at a holiday dinner, looking at you like you're a stranger wearing a familiar face. You've changed. And beneath those words, you heard the real message: you betrayed me. You became cold. You're not who you used to be. And maybe, just for a moment, you believed them. Maybe you thought, am I the problem? Did I become a bad person? But what if I told you that accusation is actually true? Not the part about betrayal, not the part about becoming cold, but the part about changing. What if you did change? And what if that's not the problem at all? What if the real issue is this: your inner world simply became larger than the relationships that once held you? Carl Jung, the founder of analytical psychology, lived this moment himself. At 38 years old, Jung's inner world expanded beyond Freud's psychoanalytic framework. Freud, his mentor, his father figure, accused him of betrayal. Their break in 1913 wasn't intellectual. It was deeply personal. Jung had outgrown his mentor, and Freud couldn't forgive him for it. The father of psychoanalysis lost his most brilliant student because that student refused to stay small. Years later, Jung wrote about this period. I had to let myself be carried along by the current without a notion of where it would lead. He began drawing mandalas, creating images from his unconscious. And through that creative work, he discovered that all his paths were leading back to a single point, the center to individuation. Outgrowing Freud's framework forced Jung into his most creative period. What looked like loss was actually discovery. If you're a deep intuitive, which corresponds to INFJ, INTJ, INFP, or INTP, something about this probably already feels familiar. That feeling of being surrounded by people you once loved deeply and realizing you can't go back. Not because you stopped caring, but because the soul contracts that once bound you together have broken. Because something expanded inside you, because you outgrew them and they never saw it coming. Today, I'm going to show you exactly what happened, why it keeps happening, and why this isn't a flaw, it's your evolutionary advantage. And if this is your first time here, this channel is for the deep, intuitive minds who refuse to stay on the surface. Subscribe so you don't miss what's coming. Before we go deeper, let me paint you a picture of who you were before this expansion happened. You were someone who could feel when something was off in a room, in a relationship, in a family dynamic, but you couldn't always name it. You'd sense tension beneath the surface, predict how conversations would go, know intuitively that someone wasn't telling the whole truth. But when you tried to articulate what you were sensing, it came out vague, uncertain. You were already seeing the patterns. This was your superpower developing. But here's what you didn't have yet: the authority to trust it. People around you underestimated what you were capable of perceiving, so you did what intelligent people do when they're still developing. You borrowed other people's certainty. You asked the confident friend, the assured mentor, the self-possessed sibling, "Am I seeing this right? Am I making this up?" And when they said you're overthinking it, or you're too sensitive, or that's just how things are, you doubted yourself. Maybe I am making patterns out of nothing. Maybe my intuition is just anxiety. But notice, you kept sensing anyway. You kept building the map even when no one validated it. This is the deep intuitive before that center emerges. You have the map in your unconscious, but you don't have a name for it yet, and you don't trust it. So you search for validation outside yourself. Jung had a name for this. He called it inflation and deflation, swinging between believing you see everything others miss and then doubting yourself completely. But here's what he understood. This oscillation is part of the process. The ego doesn't have a stable relationship to the self yet. In Jungian psychology, the self, with a capital S, is that central organizing principle of the psyche. It's not your ego, your personality, or your conscious identity. It's the totality of who you are, conscious and unconscious, integrated. And for deep intuitives, the self emerges later, not because you're slow, but because you're mapping reality at a level most people can't perceive. Whether you lead with introverted intuition like INFJs and INTJs, or you have extroverted intuition as your secondary function like INFPs and INTPs, you are a pattern recognition machine. You are equipped with intuition as your operating system. You were building the map of reality from early on. You saw family dynamics, social hierarchies, logical inconsistencies, emotional manipulation, hidden motivations, but you had no self to trust the map. So you kept asking others to validate what you were sensing, and you shaped yourself around their answers because the center was missing. But when that self finally emerges, you don't just have a center, you have a center and the map. That's your power. So what happens when that center finally emerges? What happens when your inner world expands beyond the boundaries of those old relationships? The answer is simple, and it reveals a process that liberates your hidden power. Your inner authority turns on. Your compass finally points inward. You begin to live from your true potential instead of other people's expectations. Carl Jung had a word for this process. He called it individuation. Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But here's what he didn't mention in that famous quote. Becoming who you truly are costs you almost everyone who knew who you used to be. And what I'm about to show you are 4 stories of soul contracts breaking. Not because anyone was cruel, but because individuation activates your full capacity, and most people can't handle being around someone who sees them clearly. Let me tell you the story of someone I know. Let's call her Sarah. Sarah is an INTJ, 36 years old, working in corporate strategy. She has a best friend from college. Let's call her Maya. For 10 years, Sarah went to Maya for every major decision. Should I take this job? Should I date this guy? Should I move cities? Maya always had an answer, confident, certain, never wavering. But here's what Sarah didn't see yet. Maya wasn't wise. She just never questioned herself. Sarah's introverted intuition was running 10 scenarios for every decision. Possibilities, consequences, long-term implications. Maya saw one path, the conventional one, and never considered alternatives. Maya's advice came from unexamined conditioning, not depth, and Sarah could sense this, but Maya's certainty felt like clarity. What Sarah didn't realize, Maya needed Sarah uncertain. Then Sarah hit 34. She started therapy, started reading Jung, started trusting her own perception, and she began to see clearly. Maya's life wasn't working. Same complaints, same patterns, no growth. And Maya's advice had always kept Maya in the guru position. Stay where you are. Don't take risks. It wasn't wisdom. It was control. Sarah went back and looked at Maya's advice over the years. The job that burned her out, the emotionally unavailable partner, the city she never loved. None of it had been right for Sarah. Her intuition had been right all along. She just hadn't trusted it. Now she did. Sarah started making decisions without asking Maya first, and Maya noticed. You've changed. You used to value my opinion. Sarah tried to explain, I still care about you, but I need to trust myself now. Maya couldn't accept it. Sarah had outgrown the role Maya needed her to play. The contract was simple. Sarah plays uncertain. Maya plays guru. And the moment Sarah stopped outsourcing her inner authority, the contract broke. Not because Sarah became cold, but because she stopped needing Maya's certainty to trust herself. This is what Maya called betrayal, but it was simply Sarah taking back what had always belonged to her, her inner authority. If you've lived this, just comment, changed. So we know we're not alone. Now here's the deeper question. How many of your relationships are built on contracts you didn't even know you signed? There is a moment when you realize that staying loyal to certain relationships would require betraying your own psyche. Let me tell you about Marcus. Marcus is an INFP, 42 years old, the youngest of 3 siblings. His older brother Derek has always been the strong one, the one who kept everyone together after their parents' divorce. But here's how Derek kept Marcus in line. Guilt. After everything I've done for this family, this is how you repay me? You're being selfish. Family comes first, and Marcus would fold every time. His feeling function felt the guilt like a physical weight. But here's what Marcus kept feeling. Something was wrong. Derek's love felt conditional. Derek's protection felt controlling. Marcus sensed this, but he didn't trust it. Then Marcus hit his late 30s. The anxiety, the self-doubt, the guilt, it just got heavier, and his relationships kept failing. After the third one ended the same way, he started therapy. In therapy, he started trusting what he'd been feeling his entire life instead of dismissing it. His individuation began, and the self emerged. Derek's love was conditional. The condition was Marcus's compliance. Jung called this the withdrawal of projections. Marcus stopped giving Derek the authority Derek never actually had, and Derek experienced it as a wound. He lost the mirror that reflected him as the strong one. Marcus set a boundary. Derek, I love you, but I'm making this decision for myself. I'm not asking for permission. No justification, no explanation, just a calm boundary from a centered self. And Derek exploded. You've become selfish, cold, arrogant. Because Derek didn't experience it as a boundary. He experienced it as betrayal. Marcus had outgrown the role of the lost one who needs saving. The unconscious contract broke. Marcus plays guilty, Derek plays protector. When Marcus individuated, the contract was void. Not because Marcus became cruel, but because he outgrew the guilt. Now here's the question that cuts deep. How many people in your life love you, but only if you stay small? Let me tell you about Elena. Elena is an INFJ, 34 years old, married for 6 years. When she met her husband Jordan, she was 25 and still figuring herself out. Jordan seemed to have it all figured out. Confident, self-assured, unshakable. He'd say, "I don't believe in therapy, I know myself." Elena admired his certainty. It was exactly what she was still searching for in herself. Some quiet part of her even wondered where his authority came from, but admiration gave her an easy answer. He must be wiser. He must know more. He must be further along. What she didn't see, he wasn't confident, he was rigid, and he needed Elena uncertain. Jordan built an identity in his early 20s, the successful entrepreneur, the logical realist, the guy who doesn't do emotions, and then defended it for life. Any suggestion he might be wrong? Dismissed. Any invitation to grow? Rejected. Elena was the opposite. Constantly evolving, questioning, integrating. She thought everyone was on a path of continuous becoming, but Jordan wasn't becoming, he was defending. Then, Elena hit 32. Through therapy, she started integrating her shadow, accepting her complexity, and trusting her depth. Jung said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." Elena began reclaiming the parts she had suppressed, her intensity, her emotional truth, and she started to see Jordan clearly. He was not strong. He was terrified of transformation. His certainty was not wisdom. It was calcification. And he needed her to stay uncertain. When she'd come home excited about insights from therapy, he'd say, "You're overthinking again." When she'd share a shift in perspective, he'd say, "You're always changing your mind. That's exhausting." Jordan's entire sense of self required Elena to be the uncertain one. Her individuation was a mirror reflecting his stagnation. At that moment, Elena finally understood what Jung meant when he wrote, "Where love rules, there is no will to power, and where power predominates, their love is lacking." What she had called love was built on control, and what Jordan called certainty was fear of change. The unconscious contract was simple. Elena plays uncertain, Jordan plays certain. And the moment Elena began to trust her own depth, the contract broke, not because love disappeared, but because she could no longer pretend to be smaller than she was. And that raises a quiet but unsettling question. How many people need you to stay incomplete so their world makes sense? Let me tell you about Alex. Alex is an INTP, 39 years old, in a relationship of 7 years. His partner Nina positioned herself as the emotionally intelligent one. She'd say, "You're so logical, I love that. I handle the feelings, you handle the thinking." And Alex accepted this. His thinking was his strength. Emotions felt foreign. so he stayed in his head. What Alex didn't see, Nina needed him emotionally detached. His limitation validated her identity, but Alex's thinking kept noticing inconsistencies. Nina would say she valued emotional honesty, but punish him when he was direct. She'd claim to want deeper connection, but shut down when he tried. His thinking was mapping contradictions, but he dismissed them. I don't understand emotions the way she does. Then, Alex hit 36. He started therapy, started doing shadow work. And something unexpected happened. He began accessing his feeling function, not just having emotions, but trusting the emotional data he'd been suppressing. That anxiety around Nina, it wasn't irrational, it was information. His feeling function had been signaling truth. When his thinking combined with his integrated feeling function, he saw the pattern. Nina wasn't emotionally intelligent. She was emotionally manipulative. She used feelings talk to control. When she said, "You're being cold," she meant, "Stop analyzing what I'm doing." Nina wasn't helping him understand emotions. She was keeping him confused about them. Because an Alex who trusted both thinking and feeling, that Alex could see through her. He started naming what he felt. "I feel anxious when you interpret my emotions for me." Nina's response, "You're over-analyzing feelings. This is exactly why you need me." But Alex had outgrown that script. His thinking could analyze emotional patterns. His feeling could sense manipulation. Nina's emotional depth was a performance to keep him in the cold, logical guy box. The unconscious contract broke. Alex plays detached, Nina plays emotionally aware. When Alex integrated his feeling function, when he could think and feel clearly, the contract was void. And that leads to a deeper question. How many people need you emotionally limited so they can feel emotionally superior? If you're still with me, you've probably recognized yourself in at least one of these stories. And if you're a deep intuitive going through individuation right now, I want to reframe what's happening. This isn't about loneliness, this is about liberation. Here's what happens when you individuate. You activate your full capacity. That intuition you've had your whole life, it goes from background noise to crystal clear signal. You develop penetrating psychological vision, the ability to see the real psychological age of people around you. Some people's egos froze in childhood, other people keep developing, and now you can see the difference with clarity. This isn't judgment, this is perception, and it's your evolutionary advantage. And here's what changes. Before individuation, you left relationships because something felt wrong. You couldn't name it. But after individuation, people leave you, not because you're cruel, but because you outgrew their games. You can name their patterns. You see through their defenses. And that clarity is terrifying to someone who built their identity on not being seen. You see why the confident friend never questions herself. Doubt would destabilize her identity. You see why the controlling sibling needs you compliant. Your autonomy threatens his power. You see why the partners need you uncertain or emotionally limited. Your wholeness reflects their incompleteness, and they can't manipulate you anymore. They can't keep you small because you outgrew them, and you can't unsee it. They sense that you see them, and most people can't tolerate being truly seen. Jung said, "The psychological rule says that when an inner situation is not made conscious, it happens outside as fate." Your relationships are reorganizing around your new consciousness. People who can't grow are being filtered out, not by your cruelty, but by their inability to exist near someone who sees. You're no longer willing to pretend you don't see. You're no longer willing to shrink yourself. You're no longer willing to betray your perception. This isn't loneliness. This is standards. This is self-respect. Most people stop growing in their 20s or even before. They build an identity, settle into a worldview, and defend it for life. Growth becomes a threat, but you kept going. You kept questioning. You activated your intuition to its full capacity. You completed the map. That's not a flaw, that's power. Most relationships are built on mutual incompleteness. Two people, each with a missing center, filling each other's void. These contracts work until one person outgrows them. You don't need them to fill the void anymore. The self fills it. You don't need external validation. The self validates it, and they can't forgive you for it. Your wholeness mirrors their incompleteness. Your self-authority threatens their external authority. Your transformation evidences their stagnation. This is why you outgrew almost everyone you once loved. Not because you became cold, because you became whole, because you activated your superpower, because you refused to stay small. That's not something to mourn. That's something to celebrate. So what do you do with this? First, stop apologizing for outgrowing people. You didn't betray anyone. You evolved. The people you've outgrown aren't bad people. They're just not on the path. Not everyone will do the work, but you did, and that changes everything. Second, recognize what you've gained. You're not losing relationships. You're filtering out contracts that required you to stay incomplete. You're making space for connections built on mutual wholeness. That's an upgrade, not a loss. Third, trust the transition. There's a concept in depth psychology called liminal space, the threshold between what was and what will be. You're in that threshold now, between old relationships that no longer fit and new relationships that haven't formed yet. This is where transformation happens. The old bonds had to break so the real ones could form. When you were operating from incompleteness, you attracted relationships based on unconscious contracts. Now that you're operating from wholeness, you'll attract relationships based on mutual becoming. People who aren't threatened by your growth, people who celebrate your transformation, people on their own individuation path. These people exist, but you couldn't find them until you outgrew the need for the old contracts. You couldn't attract them until you activated your full capacity. Keep going. Individuation isn't a destination, it's continuous. The self that emerged isn't static, it's dynamic, always integrating, always deepening. Your intuition is already showing you the next layer. Trust that. The transition is temporary. The power you've gained, that's permanent. This is the path. This is the power. This is the promise. Jung wrote in his later years, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." You chose to become yourself. You chose to activate your intuition. You chose to complete the map. You chose to outgrow the contracts that kept you small. The real cost wasn't losing people. It was living a lie for so long. Now you're free. If this resonated with you, I want to invite you into something. This channel is a space for deep intuitives who refuse to stay on the surface. If that's you, subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. And if you want to go even deeper than a video format allows, I write a weekly essay on my Substack, The Hidden Chamber. It's where I explore these ideas with even more psychological depth and nuance. The kind of writing that requires sitting with it, not just watching. Link is in the description. And for those who feel especially connected to this space, I've opened 2 membership options on the channel, the Inner Circle and the Guardian Circle. They're a way to support this work and help keep this ecosystem alive, with badges and some additional features that mark you as part of this community. Remember this, you've changed. They were right about that, but you didn't become cold. You didn't betray anyone. You simply outgrew people you once loved. Your inner world became larger than the relationships that could hold you. And that's not a flaw, that's individuation, and it's worth everything it costs. You earned this.